say that first.
Okay.
No. Bonjour, collègues. Today is meeting number 16 of the Standing Committee on Environment and Sustainable Development. This meeting is taking place in a hybrid format and is in public. We have witness testimony for the full 2 hours. For those in person, please follow the health and safety guidelines on the cards found on your table to prevent audio or feedback incidents. Le comité reprend son étude de la norme.
The committee continues its study on the Electric Vehicle Availability Standard, the EVAS. This morning, the committee is meeting the following witnesses.
Mr. Wiseman, Senior Climate Policy Manager. From Electoral Federation Canada, Mrs. Sherette Sinisak, Director of Standards and Government Affairs. And Équiterre, Madame Blandine Cibolo, Analyste en Mobilité.
And from Équiterre, Ms. Blandine Cibolo, Sustainable Mobility Analyst. So you will see this card. If you see that side, it means you have 1 minute left.
Over. Please try to finish your sentence. Quand je le tourne à l'envers, s'il vous plaît, essayez de terminer votre phrase le plus tôt possible.
And then when I turn over, please end your sentence as soon as possible.
Et donc, on va commencer.
So every speaker has 5 minutes for their opening remarks.
For statement, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. My name is Evan Wiseman, and I'm the Senior Climate Policy Manager at the Atmospheric Fund. We are a regional climate agency that operates in the Greater Toronto-Hamilton area and provides investments, grants, and policy supports to help scale low-carbon solutions. Today, I would like to talk to you about a policy that is more than just a climate measure. It is a health policy, an economic policy, and a statement about Canada's future. That policy is the Electric Vehicle Availability Standard, or EVAS. EVAS is not just about cars. It's about choice, affordability, and competitiveness. It ensures Canadians can access reliable, affordable electric vehicles when and where they need them. Countries without strong domestic policies risk become dumping grounds for outdated technologies, while consumers enjoy cleaner, cheaper options. If I can refer you to the chart, under the original EVAS timeline, 20% of EV sales by 2026, 60% by 2030, and 100% by 2035, we would have secured $91.9 billion in health benefits and cut 362 megatons of greenhouse gas emissions and prevented 11,000 deaths by 2050. That's our baseline, our reference point, and what we would have achieved before the delay. The health case is overwhelming. EVAS will help to avoid 11,000 premature deaths, reduce asthma attacks, lower cancer rates, clean the air in our communities, and these numbers aren't inflated. They are in fact conservative estimates. They represent fewer hospital visits, lower healthcare costs, and longer, healthier lives. Again, in the chart tells the story. What we would have advised was to stick to the original timeline and achieve $91.9 billion in health benefits. A delay by just 1 year, and that drops to $83.8 billion, a loss of $8.1 billion. This has already happened, and this is not just a delay. That's a cost that each and every Canadian pays out of pocket through our taxes and, most importantly, our health. Now, you might be wondering, how do these health numbers work? What's in them? They are based on Health Canada's benefits per ton method, which is the dollar value of air pollution reductions. In simple terms, we calculated how much air pollution drops when gasoline use declines and people shift to the use of EVs, then applied Health Canada's dollar values for the health impacts of those reductions. That includes fewer asthma attacks, lower risks of lung and heart disease, reduced hospital visits, and reduced mortality rates. When you add it all up across all the major regions and over the lifetime of the vehicles, the benefits exceed $90 billion in the original scenario. These numbers are further conservative in that at the time of calculating, Health Canada was only able to provide air modelling for southwestern British Columbia and the Windsor to Quebec City corridor, meaning this is an absolute low end, and we hope to have greater and more precise modelling that includes the rest of Canada in the future. Every time we weaken this regulation, we are not saving money. We are paying for illness, especially for children, for hospital beds and longer emergency wait times, and for lost productivity. The one-year delay already implemented will cost Canadians $8 billion in health benefits and 36 megatons of emission reductions. If you push the targets further out, the losses expand. Again, in the chart, the one-year delay plus the weakened back-end targets cost $20.9 billion in health benefits and 82 megatons of emissions. In scenario 4, with the delayed back-end, cost $19.8 billion. Let's call this what it is. Every concession to weaken EVAS increased the cost to Canadians and props up yesterday's technology at the expense of Canadians' health and wallets. Affordability matters. EV sales dipped in 2025 after the federal rebates were cancelled. Renewing rebates and adding measures like compliance credits for vehicles under $40,000 or zero-interest financing will help EVs within reach of Canadian families. Again, without these enabling policies, if you look at the chart, we risk sliding towards scenario like Quebec's weakened back-end approach, which is scenario 5 on the chart, which costs Canadians about $8.4 billion in health benefits. To keep the EVAS strong, we need scheduled reviews every 5 years. Flexibility without compromise, because the chart makes it clear. Every deviation from the original timeline costs billions in health benefits and millions in tons of emissions reductions. Regulatory certainty is the single most important catalyst for private investment in charging infrastructure. The EVAS delivers measurable gains in health, climate, and the economy. It offers certainty investors need and the affordability consumers expect, and cleaner air the Canadians deserve. Weakening EVAS is not a neutral choice. Canadians will suffer, and they will have to pay out of pocket for their taxes with their health. Let's choose progress. Let's keep Canada moving forward with the rest of the world.
Thank you, Mr. Wiseman. The floor is yours for 5 minutes. Mrs. Sinasak.
Morning, and thank you and Chair and members of the committee for inviting me to appear here today. My name is Shareth Sinasak. I'm the Director of Standards and Government Affairs, and I'm here on behalf of Electoral Federation Canada, commonly known as EFC. EFC is a national non-for-profit industry association representing over 230 member organizations that manufacture, distribute, market, and sell, as well as service, electrical and automation products. Our members' organizations manufacture everything from grid equipment to intelligent building systems, as well as the full range of equipment that is essential for a zero-emission vehicle charging infrastructure. With Canada's Net Zero Emissions Accountability Act, Canada committed to achieving net zero by 2050. This commitment was reaffirmed by Prime Minister Carney earlier this month. Let me be clear. Electrifying transportation is essential to meet that goal. It is essential also for enabling a long-term economic competitiveness and during a global energy transition to electrification. A key driver of EV adoption is availability, reliability, accessibility of charging infrastructure. Investments in charging infrastructure only occur when there is clear and consistent policy signals that give the industry confidence to plan, build, scale, and invest in local capacity. EFC represents the entire electrical supply chain. This supply chain is globally integrated. Here's why that matters. Right now, the whole world is electrifying at the same time. Manufacturers must decide where to allocate limited global production of chargers, transformers, switchgear, and other critical components that are going into this infrastructure. When governments provide policy certainty, countries receive higher priority in the global allocation. When the policy is unclear, those resources are allocated elsewhere, and the investments here in Canada will not be made. Without clear and stable demand signals, Canada risks having fewer available products, higher costs, longer lead times, delayed infrastructure deployment. These impacts will cascade. They impact affordability, providing Canadians with less choices, not more. The EV availability standard provides exactly the type of long-term predictability and the long-term signal that manufacturers need to allocate supply to Canada. It allows us to make new investments in capacity. It includes materials, workforce, and logistics. Let's put it simply, policy certainty is market certainty. Across the electrical and automation industry, companies are operating under the assumption that Canada will maintain its regulatory trajectory. If Canada chooses to backtrack and abandon the standard or weaken it significantly, we will miss out on critical economic development opportunities. We will lose jobs, and we will miss out on investments. The impacts would be felt down our supply chains by manufacturers of chargers, transformers, switchgear, battery storage systems, and other critical components. Private investment in charging infrastructure will stall, and because there will be a lack of business confidence. EFC recommends the government pause at the 2032 compliance ratio of 83%. This will provide the sector and the supply chains with the confidence for further investments, and doing so will provide Canadians with a choice. Those who would like to access an EV can, and those who would like to maintain ICE vehicles, internal combustion engine vehicles, they will still have the ability to do that as well. But the EV availability standard is not merely an emissions policy. It is an economic strategy, and it is a supply chain signal. EFC encourages the government to maintain the strength of EFAS. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here today, and I look forward to all your questions.
Thank you, Mrs. Sinasak. Et la parole est à vous.
Ms. Cibolo, you have 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I am Blanzi Cibolo, and I am a sustainable transportation analyst at Equiterre.
Of Quebec's zero-emission vehicle standard and the Government of Canada's electric vehicle availability standard, we have contributed to the development of both policies through continuous feedback. Since 2018, Equiterre has also been leading a large-scale awareness campaign, Roulons électriques, to inform and educate Quebecers as well as organizations about EVs. Cette campagne de sensibilisation s'est bâtie non.
This awareness campaign was developed not only with partners in the environmental electrification sectors, but also with dealerships across Quebec. For 6 years, we ran advertising campaigns and maintained our presence in all regions, particularly in auto shows, to talk to people and debunk misconceptions about EVs. What our survey showed last year is that 99% of EV owners do not want to go back to gas cars. In Quebec, the ZEV standard adopted in 2018 meant that last year, 1 in 3 new vehicles sold was electric. That's more than 30% of total sales. So nearly 2 years ahead of schedule compared to Quebec's targets. What are the ingredients for success? Stable regulations that are certainly restrictive, but include flexibility to absorb economic turbulence. 2, aggressive financial incentives. 3, a strategy for electric charging. And 4, extensive awareness campaigns. In Canada, sales have significantly increased since the adoption of EVAS. According to a study conducted by John Axon of Simon Fraser University for Equiterre and its partners, this standard is the most effective policy for reducing greenhouse gas emissions from light-duty vehicles. While the proliferation of SUVs and pickup trucks has offset 80% of savings achieved through electrification. The standard will also reduce the cost of EVs by 20% while allowing industry to increase its profits. How do we come to question a regulation that is the result of several years of work, studies, and consultations that industry itself took part in? Let us remember that it was our neighbors who initiated this crisis by imposing tariffs on their industry, on their own companies that do business in Canada, thereby penalizing the entire economy and the finances of Canadians. And here we are, wondering what concessions we could make to this industry, while penalizing EV manufacturers and Canadian dealers who depend on them, whether they're in Quebec or elsewhere. The trade war has given the Canadian auto industry an opportunity to strengthen a strategy that has been in place since the 70s. The decline in EV sales in 2025, which is very real, is the result of political uncertainty, a sudden withdrawal of federal and provincial incentives, and organized industrial discourse aimed at slowing down the transition in order to preserve a technology that dates back to another century. But these are circumstantial and temporary factors, while global economic and technological trends clearly remain in favor of electrification. It would be a mistake to mistake this temporary situation with a long-term structural trend. The EVIS is already designed with a high degree of flexibility. For example, a manufacturer that has not met its sales targets has 3 years to make up the shortfall. It can also invest in charging infrastructure instead of selling EVs, or can sell plug-in hybrid vehicles. These elements were designed specifically to help them weather market turbulence. If additional flexibility is necessary, we recommend that the sale of affordable EVs be eligible for additional tax credits. We also recommend the return of targeted one-time incentives for low and middle-income households. And we recommend investments in large-scale education and awareness programs. EVAS is an effective policy. It is flexible, robust, and designed to absorb market shocks. What we need is not a reversal. What we need is stability. Canada is not giving up on the electric future, but is continuing to invest to build its new industry here in Canada. Canada is staying the course and weathering economic turbulence thanks to stable policies that provide predictability for electrification stakeholders. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Cibolo.
To Mrs. Anstey for 6 minutes.
Thank you. And thank you to the witnesses for being here today. I've sat in, and we've had a few of these meetings now, and a lot of the conversation has been very similar. And I want to return to something that my colleague touched on in our last meeting, and that's with respect to the constituency concerns that we have around the EV mandates, and especially as that translates out in rural areas. And one of the responses that we've commonly gotten is this notion that it's really just a result of myths or misinformation that's been spreading with respect to the EV mandates. And so my translation of that is that the government just hasn't convinced the Canadian public yet. And so I want to respond today with some of the realities of the rural communities that I represent. And I just want to start and say that just because these concerns or this information comes from around kitchen tables or the floors of dealerships in rural communities doesn't mean that it's misinformed or rural people's voices are just not well educated enough. So if you would just allow me to sort of give you some information about my riding, and then I'm going to allow you to respond. The riding that I represent is 47,000 square kilometers and extremely sparsely populated. So as an example, we have communities that have 150 people, 40 or 50 people. And the low density alone of my riding makes the rollout of charging infrastructure fundamentally different from an urban center. So we can't assume that the solutions for Toronto and Vancouver are going to translate well out into some of these more rural areas. Now, I just want to give you some context here. If you live in St. Anthony in Newfoundland and Labrador, you have to travel 470 kilometers to deliver your baby. Now, if something happens while you're in the hospital and, heaven forbid, that child has to go to a NICU, that's over 1,000 kilometers from this community. So these are some of the challenges that these people are facing. In addition to that, there's 3 communities in my riding, Grey River, Francois, Ramia. You can only get there by ferry. no charging infrastructure in any of these places. These are some of the really rural components that we're talking about. And I know we're often framing these conversations to say, you know, you don't need to buy an EV today. But practically speaking, whether that's 7 or 5 or 4 years down the road, whether it's a 20% or an 80%, it might as well be 100% given what these people are looking at right now. So my question is, especially as it relates to this myth-busting narrative, because another piece of this is we're asking these people to pay $15,000 to $20,000 more in upfront costs for a lot of these vehicles, which absolutely don't make any sense for the communities and the areas that they live in. I think that when we're having these conversations, I get extremely frustrated because I feel it's deeply dismissive of the lived experience of rural Canadians in some of these really rural and remote areas. And it's not just about educating them. It's about really understanding the dynamics. When you also look at these family-owned and operated repair shops, they don't have the upfront money to invest in new electrification within these areas or specialized technicians. So, you know, these seem like some pretty far-fetched concepts for people living in these rural communities. So I just kind of wanted to put it out there to either of you, actually, to sort of walk me through, based on the picture that I've just painted for you, what you feel is, how do I respond to my constituents who look at me and say, this makes absolutely no sense to me? Can you help me to overcome that barrier? Because, I mean, I guess, are we just going to give them some more information and debunk these challenges for them?
So I grew up in a rural community. My family is Mennonite. We are farmers. And I know that we drove very long distances to get to local towns and committees. The savings, I mean, the facts do matter. The savings when you drive long distances are even greater. Look at Lucid right now. They have a car 800 kilometers. The battery technology is improving every single day.
But if they live in a community that they can only get there by ferry, so are we telling them, you're going to take that car, you're going to put it on the ferry, you're going to take it over, you're going to bring it to, I don't know, 400 or 500 kilometers, where you're going to charge it up there, you're going to drive it back, like,
there's also hybrid
that.
vehicles which are available, and that's also in the EVAS standard. So if it depends on your particular situation,
so we're
you may choose a hybrid vehicle to save
telling them
money.
What to drive in that case? Like
well, it depends on if you want to do the math, right? So if you want to, I spend a ton of money on gas. We have a truck. It's expensive. If I want to save money, I'm buying an electric truck. Yep.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Miedema, the floor is yours for 6 minutes.
Thank you to all the witnesses for your wonderful testimony and for being here this morning. I wonder, because there wasn't too much time to answer that original question from my colleague opposite, if you'd like to take another, let's say, minute to provide some response. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just say quickly, in a lot of our feedback that we do in terms of polling from citizens, 80% of charging is expected to happen at home. You look in cases of British Columbia with Hydro BC, they have disconnected grid charging as well. So a lot of this charging can be happening in a lot of very innovative ways that can also provide redundancy for rural communities, particularly in extreme inclement weather events that we're seeing more and more. Electric vehicles can keep your home powered, can keep your fridge on, can keep the lights on, can keep you cool in hot weather and warm in cold weather.
Ms. Sinisak, did you want to say any more to that original question?
I can add a couple of things. Yes, I was going to say, obviously, before customer demand arrives, we all agree that the infrastructure and the offer needs to be here in terms of vehicle and charging infrastructure, and this is exactly the purpose of this regulation. It's not to force people, it's to bring infrastructure and offer the right offer of electric vehicle that people need. So this is the first component. And when this is in place, then obviously when people are educated, are given the right information, customer demand arrive. That's what we have been witnessing in Quebec, and that can happen all across Canada.
Thank you. Oh, go ahead.
No further comments, sorry. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that. Let's talk a little bit about the health benefits that you mentioned. That I have never seen those numbers before. Thank you for actually going through how they were calculated. You said that they were quite conservative and why that was so. What would a more optimistic and potentially realistic picture look like?
It gets very complicated because of how airflows work, but some of the numbers also establish it. So it doesn't include Atlantic Canada, it doesn't include the western provinces outside of southwestern British Columbia, it doesn't include Northern Ontario or Quebec, and it doesn't include the territories. So you can start to see that number it would go up. Also within the numbers is a bit of a low estimate for certain health events, whether it's emergency room visit based off Health Canada numbers, was determined from a 1995, a 1996, and a 2007 study, I believe it was. And those numbers, we adjusted for inflation for what an emergency room visit would be, but that only got us to around $3,500. So that's not what an emergency room visit costs in 2025, because healthcare costs have vastly outstripped inflation. So there are numbers, like this was a very conservative estimate. We did our best to really give the benefit of the doubt in the numbers because we didn't want to paint an inaccurate picture. We wanted to provide a floor for good policy decisions to be made.
Thanks for that. And this would be kind of reducing the health impact because those emissions are gone, because they're electric vehicles. Does it consider what would happen to health if we actually don't achieve emissions reduction targets locally as well as around the globe? I'm thinking about wildfires and the serious health impacts and air quality impacts from wildfires. Like, that's not part of this, is it?
No, the wildfires are not included in the numbers. It includes particulate matter, PM2.5, noxic oxide, volatile organic compounds that are emitted from the tailpipe. These are just tailpipe emissions. And for light-duty vehicles as well, it doesn't include MHDVs.
Okay, thank you. Going back to you, Ms. Sinisak, you said you're a nonprofit industrial association. Can you just say a little bit about the different organizations, companies you represent, who they are?
Yeah, so we represent 230 member organizations, and many of these are manufacturers. So some of the names that you may actually recognize are companies such as Eaton, Siemens, ABB, and then we represent, obviously, Schneider Electric. These are all global organizations, but they also have Canadian operations, they have Canadian employees, and they're making significant investments here in Canada right now to prepare for electrification. The numbers are actually quite mind-boggling when I put them all on one sheet. So ABB is a company from Switzerland, but they have significant Canadian manufacturing, and they're developing a $130 million investment in Quebec to produce here in Canada. And that is to prepare for electrification of transportation. And I could go down the whole list here.
And what would happen if companies like that lost the policy and market certainty that the EVAS is providing?
Yeah, so when I spoke to our members and I asked them what would happen if EVAS went away, they said EVAS sets the tone for ZEV's future here in Canada. And without it, the shift will still happen. It will just be slower, and we will be less prepared. So we know what happens when we don't prepare our supply chains. We saw that during COVID, right? So this is a situation where we want to make sure that we are producing these things in Canada, that the investments are coming to Canada. There will be job losses, and there will be decisions. Even this pause right now, I guarantee you, has paused investments in supply chains here in Canada. They are saying, let's wait and see.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Bonnet, la parole est à vous pour 6 minutes.
Mr. Bonnet, 6 minutes. Mr. Speaker, I will do the complete opposite of what my Conservative colleagues are doing, which is to ask questions instead of filling time. Ms. Belot, do you have examples of roulants électriques to raise awareness and to fight disinformation? Because people have criticized the federal government for having done nothing on that. Can you give us a summary as well? Yes, absolutely. I can definitely provide you with a brief. The Rouleau Électrique campaign has been around for 6 or 7 years. We just wrapped it up, and we're now working with the federal government on electric recharging. That campaign grouped around 12 to 15 partners on things such as the environment, electrification, and people from the EV world, as well as car dealerships for EVs. We had a platform to provide information. We had ad campaigns. We were in other regions in Quebec. EV owners in Quebec also worked with us. They organized road tests for free so that people who did not have access to EVs can try EV models and to learn from car owners. That spread information and increased people's knowledge and helped move forward with the adoption of EVs in Quebec. Road tests are known as something that works. So I would encourage all of you to look into that. We also had webinars, information campaigns. We were at car shows. We spoke to people individually to debunk false beliefs. We had a guide on all EVs in Quebec for individuals and for groups. Believe me, you have a wide, impressive variety of choices to meet all needs. And I think you said that the standard can reduce prices by 20%. Can you elaborate? Yes. There was a study by John Axon done a few years ago that shows that regulations will reduce the cost of EVs by 20%. It's an essential way to encourage people to buy them. We know that it is one of the major barriers when it comes to buying EVs. We also need to educate people on the savings across the life cycle of a car. A lot of people just look at the cost of purchase, but you need to convince them that very quickly they get their money's worth. And the more you use, the more you save on gas and maintenance. You can save hundreds, if not thousands of dollars, depending on the financial incentives that are available. Every year, with financial incentives, you can save $2,000 to $3,000. So the EVAS is essential to reduce the cost of purchase and to convince people who have concerns. Can you also send us the study made by Mr. John Axon? You said that 90% of people who have EVs do not want to go back to gas cars. So is that a survey? Can you explain why? Why do 90% of people not want to go back? That was a survey made during our campaign. So we talked to people who are aware of electrification because they are users and owners of EVs. So we expected a higher rate. In fact, the satisfaction rate or the rate of people who do not want to go back to gas cars is 99%, so very impressive. So that's why we say that when people try EVs, that's enough to convince them to not go back to gas cars. Often it's the savings that make a difference in people's lives. When it comes to the drop in sales, you talked about uncertainty, government's backtracking, and an industry campaign that reduces sales. Can you talk about those three elements? Yes, industry launched a campaign. We know that since the 70s, People have been saying that it's hard to reduce emissions, that it's hard to adopt new technologies. The Car Manufacturers Association of Canada created this campaign that is spreading false information on EVs, and we think that is deeply regrettable because we are not working towards the same direction. It means that it's twice as hard to convince people when they are exposed to erroneous information. So you talked about government backtracking. So the government is also responsible for the drop in sales. Yes. There is the reduction of financial incentives. A lot of people have been waiting for the return of subsidies since May. Minister Joly announced it, and we are still waiting after it. Sales dropped when the government reduced incentives, and they re-increased after the incentives were put back in place.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And over the last 10 years at least, it's been the national and provincial strategy to electrify Canada and the province of BC. I was an MLA there when I first found out about Clean BC's mandate to have electric cars mandated as a purchaser's option, is what they called it. But it wasn't really a purchaser's option because there was a penalty attached to it. 90% EVs in BC by 2030 and 100% of EVs by 2035. But the penalty was a $20,000 charge put on retailers that would then be passed on to consumers, which was very unaffordable. Even without the rebate, was very unaffordable for low-income earners. And as soon as the rebate started being questioned or being dropped, then people stopped purchasing EVs. So I've heard the argument from the witnesses saying that we should not walk away from the mandate of EVs. But do the witnesses, and I'll direct my question to Mr. Wiseman, do you think that the $20,000 penalty attached to EVs should remain as well?
I think it's to be clear, the EVAS is incredibly flexible in how those compliance components can be accommodated. If a manufacturer doesn't sell enough EVs, they can roll over year for up to 3 years to come into compliance. They can partner with electric charging companies to further install more charging, and they get credits for that. I believe they also get credits for hybrid vehicles as well. So that's many of the manufacturers right now. And I think the key point,
Mr. Wiseman, I've only got 6 minutes here, so
sure.
The specific question was: does the $20,000 penalty to retailers that gets passed on to consumers, should that remain as part of the mandate?
It doesn't work like that, though. To be clear, there's a lot of flexibilities, and then it's up to the OEMs to decide how they work with it. And I think the key point here, just on our health benefits, is there are today costs to Canadians as well related to inaction.
I understand that. But my question was specific because I asked the same question in BC, and basically their answer was yes, that penalty will remain. Why I'm asking is because BC just dropped their mandate. They said it wasn't realistic. And I'm sure everybody in this room, and in Canada for that matter, wants to see a cleaner future. But it's got to be realistic. And this is what the BC government's saying now, that it has to be realistic. And I like your comments in terms of choice and affordability, but it's not much of a choice if there's a markup in cost, either the retailer or the manufacturer, that gets passed on to the consumer. So with the rebates, the demand starts to go down. But in BC, we have a problem with production and supply of electricity. We're probably one of the greenest provinces in terms of providing electricity, mainly coming from dams, for instance. Site C is going to be producing 1,100 megawatts of electricity, and it's not enough for today's needs, let alone future needs. We've got a $6 billion Northwest transmission line being built in BC as well, from Prince George to Terrace, BC. And that's not enough for current demand, let alone future demand. On top of that, we're actually importing electricity from the United States, which questionably produces their electricity from natural gas and coal. So has your organization done any investigations into how we can increase the production and supply of clean electricity?
Oh, absolutely. I could happy to come back on another study if you'd like to engage with that, and we'd be more than
That'd
happy
be
to
great.
come back.
Just give me
But
some.
absolutely, the line we always say at TAF is the cheapest kilowatt hour is the one you don't use, and so efficiency is the name of the game to begin with. Like that's step one. That's the cheapest thing you could start doing today is start with energy efficiency. From there, you start to go into deployment of alternative renewable resources. Solar can deploy incredibly quickly. Wind can deploy incredibly quickly. Battery electric and storage can help, especially with charging on off-peak or overnight hours. I know that the Hydro-Quebec is looking at getting a lot of its demand response from electric vehicles as well in off-peak, in peak shaving and off-peak times. And so electric vehicles shouldn't be viewed as just a drain on the system. They are an absolute resource.
I'm not talking about
as well,
EVs. I'm talking about the production and supply, which we're actually deficient in right now in BC, and yet we have the most abundant clean energy. In fact, BC right now has put limits on electricity use in BC. We talk about a new economy.
Thank you, Mr. Ross.
5 or 6 minutes?
5 minutes.
Oh, 5. Sorry about that.
Mr. Fanjoy, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you, witnesses. Thank you, witnesses. I'd like to go back to an earlier point that Ms. Sinasek talked about in terms of the supply chain for components to help electrify our grids and our communities, and the impact of the signals that government policy has on the development or the contraction of that supply chain. Could you please elaborate on how that would impact the pace at which Canada, whether we're talking rural communities, of which I represent one too, or urban communities, how would that impact Canada?
Sorry, is the question about if EVAS was retracted or how that would impact?
Yes, the signal that would have for the development of our supply chains in Canada and globally.
Yeah, so it's crucially important. We saw, obviously, with COVID, what happens when you have the whole world is in demand for something. So we saw the price of PPE go up, right? Because we weren't prepared with the supply chain. So we know the impact of not preparing your supply chain, and we know that right now there is significant investments going on in the electrical industry here in Canada, trying to manufacture more transformers here in Canada. We have PTI Transformers, who is located in Regina, Saskatchewan, and Winnipeg, and they are sourcing 85% of their raw materials from Canadian suppliers, and they have just made a major expansion to produce more transformers here in Canada. I could go on, and I will, if you'll let me. $150 million in battery production in Oakville, right? So when you produce more electricity, you attract investment. It's really an economic tool. You see the battery production facility in Oakville. They decided to choose Canada instead of the U.S. because we have clean and affordable electricity. Quebec, there's a reason why companies locate in Quebec. Clean and affordable electricity. So this is the economics behind electrification. And making sure that our supply chains, we have the supply in here in Canada so that we don't have to compete with the rest of the world, driving up those costs, delaying projects. We want that investment here. They can choose to say, okay, where are we going to allocate this year? Let's allocate to France because we know France is going electric. But then Canada doesn't get those investments. So we lose out on jobs and investments when we don't send the policy signals.
Okay, thank you. One of the things we talk a lot about here in the House of Commons is affordability. I know it's a matter that I think all of my colleagues share. Now, the total cost of ownership of an electric vehicle is, even without subsidizing the upfront cost, it's a clear win for electricity due to reduced maintenance costs and in particular reduced and more plentiful electricity, which we can produce ourselves through renewable energy projects here in Canada. What are the obstacles that are preventing faster adoption? Is it something that through smart public policy we can help to advance this process faster?
I feel like Evan is going to be the best person to answer this question. Even though I want Evan to answer it.
I would say very quickly, aligning with the safety regulations with the EU to bring more models in, number one. Examining even the tariffs on the Chinese EVs up front as well to increase the number of EVs coming in early. That would absolutely impact the health benefits as well, because think of this as compound interest. You can't make this up on the back end by investing more. You have to invest early and continue that investment. Additionally, at the municipal levels, there's a lot of red tape that impacts charging being able to be deployed. That you could do another study on that. The provincial strategies as well, like BC and Quebec, are notable in how effective they've been, largely because of the intensive charging strategies they've deployed. While other provinces like Ontario, while they've invested money recently in Charge On, it's a great program. We love to see it. There needs to be a more comprehensive strategy to help address range anxiety as part of the education.
Thank you, Mr. Wiseman. Monsieur Bonnet, la parole est à vous pour 2 points.
Mr. Bonnet, you have the floor for 2.5 minutes. Can you provide us an overview of your report on the health and costs and impacts?
Be that prior to the delay that the Prime Minister announced.
Sorry, I don't have a lot of time. Can you send that report?
Parce que je pense que vous parlez de 11 000.
I think you talked about 11,000 premature deaths. Is that it?
Major. J'aimerais revenir.
Ms. Sinisak, I want to talk about the loss of jobs and investment. Do you have numbers? How many jobs will be lost? How much investment will be lost? Can you also send us something about that?
Currently, it would all depend on the strength of EFAS. If we can keep the strength of EFAS, like I said earlier, that 83% will allow people to have choice, but it will send the proper policy signals for investment. If we don't achieve that strength, I don't have the exact numbers now. It will all depend on where we land.
Okay. Est-ce que vous avez des scénarios?
Do you have scenarios?
Obviously, the EFAS just came out 60 days. Our scenarios are all about projections to prepare.
Okay. Est-ce que vous en connaissez des scénarios?
Do you know scenarios? Are there organizations that have scenarios?
Thank you.
I'm on the board of Electromobility Canada, and we've partnered with Ernst & Young, and there's a report. Currently, the EV ecosystem employs about 130,000 people. We expect it to grow to about 600,000 in an optimistic scenario with EVAS. It's an Ernst & Young report. We'll provide that as well.
Okay, merci.
Yeah, and I believe the low end was 300,000 jobs, so that's over 300,000 jobs that we could miss out on.
Okay, merci. Madame Sibilo, selon vous,
Ms. Sibilo, do you believe that's a good idea to consider conventional EVs? Do you believe that should be in the mandate? Excellent question. No. We think it's a horrible idea that harms electrification because an unpluggable hybrid vehicle is not an EV. It pollutes. It actually pollutes 300 times more than a conventional vehicle, and it makes us still dependent on fossil fuels and does not incite the installation of recharging stations.
Mr. Bexty, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate your witnesses coming today. This is fascinating. Fascinating subject, and I have so many different places I'd like to start. Ms. Sinsarak, could you comment about the electrical equipment? What is the back order right now on transformers?
There was a back order during the pandemic, but we have been scaling in order to meet that demand. And a lot of that is caused by data centers, not by EVs.
Thank you very much. So that implies then that demand overall is increasing because, I mean, the industry is growing into new markets.
Yeah, we're
in
investing.
Data centers as
Yeah.
well, right? So what is the typical delay in from order to delivery?
I don't think there's a significant delay right now. It's come down because of the new investments in Canada, and
So
because
this is 125 and less, or what
and
about
this is
substation?
this is also with the trade relationship with the U.S. We're now not able to export as many as we used to be able to. So there is actually we need demand here in Canada.
Okay, Mr. Wiseman, could you explain why is the EV adoption rate so low in some regions? Like, what is your understanding of that?
It varies. Incentives are a big part of it. Purchase incentives. I think one part is that, especially if you look globally, year over year, the sales have continued to increase. Canada's been an outlier.
No, I mean specifically within Canada.
Yeah, specifically
right?
within Canada. I mean, I think partly the federal government announcing earlier this year that there was going to be an incentive, and that was about 6 months ago, and they haven't brought it back out, has depreciated
So there's
purchases.
no other features of the regions themselves that have different characteristics?
There are.
Why?
BC and Quebec, range anxiety isn't really as much of a factor as it is in other
Thank you very
provinces
much.
because
So
of the
other
studies.
places, range anxiety is a factor.
Generally because they're still in deploying their infrastructure more, but it really goes to show when you have a plan, it really does manifest in deployment.
Could, let me see here. Ms. Sinsarak, your press release argues that the EV mandate provides industry certainty. Do you agree that it simultaneously provides consumers certainty by restricting their ability to purchase the vehicle that they would like to have?
Sorry, I said that it restricts their ability?
No, you said your press release argues the EV mandate provides industry certainty.
Yeah.
Do you agree that it simultaneously removes consumer certainty by restricting their ability to purchase the type of vehicle that they would like?
I don't agree with that. No, I think that you can continue. There's a lot of myths around. It's not a ban on internal combustion vehicles, and the presence of the 100% figure has been repeatedly mischaracterized as a consumer ban. But you can.
It is 100%, right? I mean, and it's not a question of choice and increasing choice. It's a mandate by design.
And I think
it'll be 100% is 100%.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's why we're suggesting going down to 80% to keep the strength of EVAS, but ensuring that Canadians don't feel that it's a mandate. This has become a political lightning rod, and this isn't maybe an opportunity,
Maybe
but it's essential. It's
Thank you.
essential that you keep the strength of EVAS.
Thank you. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. Did you poll satisfaction results in rural areas? Like, could you break that out? Rural versus urban, lower mainland, BC versus the GTA, the Golden Horseshoe?
The poll that I mentioned about that was for Quebec. That was linked to our campaign
Only
in Quebec.
Did it
Yes.
separate out rural versus urban?
I don't have the numbers,
Okay, thank you.
but it's 99%, so it wouldn't make a lot of difference.
You could argue as people that are already bought EVs that have already committed to that, and it doesn't include any stretch of the balance of the population. All of the witnesses, I would like to follow the tact of my bloc colleague. Ms. Sinsarak, you're fully funded by the electrical manufacturers industry?
We are a non-for-profit industry association.
But it's fully funded by the electrical manufacturers?
Yes, we represent
companies?
electrical and automation
thank you.
manufacturers and distributors.
Mr. Wiseman, could you supply the committee with your funding structure?
Yeah, absolutely.
Please, okay. Ms. Selblu, same? You provide this funding structure to the committee?
Sure.
Where your funding comes from? There is some question as to the funding of agenda dictating outcomes of belief. I had one final question, Mr. Wiseman, about your data on the health. Could you explain the change of inflection as the projected outcomes get worse and worse and worse? There's an inflection, and the benefits drop, and drop. Time is up.
Thank you very
Okay,
much.
thank
Sorry
you.
about that. Mr. Greaves, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning to the witnesses, and thank you, colleagues, for having me today. I'd like to follow up on this question that has been raised about the accuracy of some of the information that's circulating around the EVAS and electrical vehicles more broadly. Something that hasn't been discussed yet in this meeting but seems relevant is with respective questions around long distances and remote communities, and also questions around the suitability of EVs in winter and cold temperatures and so on. We have a very strong comparator to Canada in the country of Norway. I wonder if you might speak to that briefly in terms of what lessons we could derive and in terms of the accuracy of some of the information that has, to be blunt, been trial ballooned again here today, whether or not we might look to the existing example of Norway that has now achieved 90% EV adoption in that country as a very, very solid base on which to dispel some of these myths.
Yeah, I think the key points are education, incentives, and support for consumers, as well as robust and intentional charging infrastructure deployment. It's do those four things, and you get higher adoption rates. I think the key point, too, is as we've learned more and more about the impacts of this as well, I think it's key for Canada to factor in the health impacts, which weren't a factor in the original RIAS for the original Canada Gazette process, which we would like to see included this time around as a factor.
Thank you. If either of your colleagues would like to respond, please.
Oui. One fact that I could share with you is that there are about 4 times more charging infrastructure in Norway than in Canada. That's based on the number of charging stations and public stations by 50 kilometers of highway roads.
Mm-hmm. And so would it be fair to say that one of the reasons that Norway has been so successful in this regard is also that they've maintained consistency in their policy approach and that they haven't seen this yo-yo swinging back and forth that actively serves, of course, to undermine the very intent of these kinds of incentives and these kinds of programs?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that.
And
please.
I think it's really important that we all sort of row in a similar direction. I mean, I think the elephant in the room here is that we have car companies who are actively lobbying against EVs right now. We want car companies to be successful, but we have to figure out as Canadians, we have a very educated workforce here in Canada, how to all be successful together. We all boats can rise. We have to figure out where our competitive edge is. China is investing significantly, billions and billions of dollars, and that is why we are not able to compete. We need to figure out where we can compete, and we need to do it as a country. And the more we fight between each other, the less we succeed as a whole.
Thank you. I'd like to follow up on this discussion about sources of information and the quality of information that circulates around this issue. It has been raised this morning, and in fact, aspersions have been raised about the potential motivations of these witnesses based on the ways in which your organizations are funded. I'd like to invite you to respond to that, but also in terms of whether or not you feel that that's a valid criticism to make of your organizations and your representation today, but also if you could speak to where are the sources of this misinformation, whether or not it's purposeful or whether or not it's unintentionally or sloppily inaccurate, where is that information coming from that has led some Canadians to be, for example, under the misimpression that it would be a ban on all gasoline-powered vehicles that would go into effect, rather than a standard for new vehicles to meet a certain rate of EV adoption. That seems to be a critical point that is widely and indeed perhaps actively disseminated.
I could go first. So TAF is actually incorporated under provincial statute as well as an agreement with the City of Toronto. I'll be quick. And we work off of an endowment model. And so we invest into the market with expected rates of return, and we operate off of that return on investment for our operating costs is the quick version of that. In terms of the misinformation, I think it's concerning, especially where we see sometimes there's a narrative of, oh, just let the industry decide. But when you've given voluntary metrics to industry, they have failed to meet them consistently in every scenario, particularly in California with CARB. They've never achieved what they say they will. So I think it's the key is I've never met an industry that likes more regulations.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Sinisek.
I think it's healthy to question people's intentions. I think it's healthy to question where my funding comes from. I think that's a healthy thing to do. I think that you just need to look if you want to win, you have to look at the facts. If you want to compete in a world that is electrifying, look around the world. Why is China pumping huge money into electrification? Because they're dumb? No, they're very smart. They know where they're going. They know where the puck is going, and they're skating to it. So go ahead, do your own research, but the facts are the facts.
Nope, Stu, merci.
Thank you very much, and I would like to thank the witnesses for their testimony today. The witnesses are now excused, and the meeting will briefly suspend while we prepare the next panel. Le comité reprend son étude de...
The committee resumes its study on the availability of EVs. This afternoon, the committee is meeting the following witnesses. From the Quebec Association of EVs, Sébastien Côté, President, welcome.
David Adams, President, welcome. Et Propulsion Québec.
And from Propulsion Québec, Stéphane Pécalon, Project Manager, welcome. Every speaker has 5 minutes for their opening statements. You will see me raise this card. That means you have 1 minute left. And once I turn it, it means please end your sentence. Perfect. Mr. Côté, starting with you, you have 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair, committee members. I am Sébastien Beauté, and I'm pleased to be here with you as the president of the Quebec EV Association, or EVEC for short. For 12 years, EVEC has been a non-profit organization whose mission is to support and promote e-mobility in Quebec through training, education, and representation. We have been able to do so thanks to the expertise of our employees and volunteers. Our vision is simple and ambitious, to be the go-to source for Quebec consumers for information and education on e-mobility in Quebec. Our role is to provide objective information to EV consumers, to demystify the technology and the real costs of use, and support future buyers with experienced volunteers who have accumulated millions of e-miles, and support reliable data. We are not an activist organization, we're a consumer organization for consumers. So why is it important to maintain the EVAS? For two main reasons, accessibility and affordability. For EVs to be a real option for households, in 2024, according to Statistics Canada, zero-emission vehicles accounted for 13.8% of all vehicle sales in the country. In the second quarter, that fell to 9.2%, and in June of 2025, only 7.9% of vehicles sold were ZEVs. In other words, the Canadian market is slowing down. Why? Because supply is not keeping pace with the rest of the world. Without an EVAS, Canada becomes a low-priority market for manufacturers, which means fewer models, slower deliveries, and higher prices. With clear standards, we force the industry to offer the same vehicles as the ones offered in Europe or California. Canada must remain in the group to ensure a modern and competitive market for its people. When manufacturers must deliver, prices drop. That creates a winning situation for our consumers. Canadian EVs are good for consumers across the life cycle. For example, the total cost of a 2022 Kona Electric was around $50,000, compared to $60,000 for the gasoline version. The savings of over $10,000 is due to drastically lower energy costs. Quebec consumers who benefit from low-cost hydroelectricity enjoy substantial savings. Traveling 100 kilometers in the EV costs around $2 to $3 when recharged at home, compared to $10 to $15 for a gasoline car. In order to not be behind successful countries, we often compare Quebec to Norway. That's not a dream, because more than 80% of new vehicles in this country are fully electric. Meanwhile, Canada is capped at less than 14% in 2025. What are the differences between Canada and Norway? Norway implemented a clear policy, strict regulations, and a stable vision. And the results? More models, cheaper, that are available sooner. Without standards, Canada is becoming a country where the industry is liquidating its gasoline car models while selling its EVs elsewhere. The zero-emission EV enables an orderly transition that protects the economy, the workforce, and charging infrastructure. Without a predictable framework, private investment in charging slows down, and that directly harms consumers, small businesses, and workers. The standard sends a clear and stable signal to industry. Charging companies can play ahead, electricians can be trained, manufacturers can invest, and SMEs can innovate. Municipalities are gradually adapting. On the other hand, a market without standards becomes chaotic. Alternatively, between surpluses and shortages, there's inconsistent investments and infrastructure progressing in fits and starts. A poorly managed transition, a planned transition rather, such as that enabled by the ZEV standard, reduces risks and maximizes benefits. In closing, EVEC's mission is simple. We want to tell people that by adopting vehicles that align with their needs, and the EVAS is not a constraint. It's beneficial to them. Thank you, Mr. Gold. Mr. Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members of the committee, for the opportunity to speak to you today on behalf of the 16 member companies of the Global Automakers of Canada. The Global Automakers of Canada is a national trade association representing the Canadian interests of 16 of the world's most significant automakers. Our members are collectively responsible for more than 62% of the sales in Canada, and our two manufacturing members, Toyota and Honda, are Canada's largest and second largest vehicle producers, representing through the end of September 75.5% of Canadian light-duty vehicle production. Additionally, GAC member Volkswagen and their partner PowerCo remain in the process of building up the $7 billion factory in St. Thomas, Ontario, that is slated to employ up to 3,000 people directly. Importantly, the members directly and indirectly employ more than 216,000 people, contribute almost $25 billion to Canada's GDP, and generate more than $10.5 billion in government revenues. With respect to electric vehicles, GAC members have been at the forefront of their introduction into the Canadian marketplace, with the Nissan Leaf and the Mitsubishi i-MiEV being introduced in Canada in 2011. Since then, GAC members have gone on to make 63% of the 120 model variants of ZEVs available in Canada, with more to come. I want to be clear at the outset that the members of the GAC are fully committed to decarbonizing their products. Our challenge with the government has always been the tools deployed to attempt to drive that decarbonization and the time frame over which that decarbonization should take place. The EVAS is a technology-specific tool. The rules as currently constructed under the EVAS establish targets that are not achievable by the entire industry. We believe both industry and government want achievable, durable regulatory certainty. To that end, we appreciated the government's response to pause the application of the EVAS for the 2026 model year. We want to offer additional specific recommendations. First, the review should be extended beyond the initial 60-day period in order to develop realistic regulation for automakers that keeps Canada competitive with Europe and the United States. We currently do not know what the regulatory environments will be in these jurisdictions, and we need to know that in order to develop a credible and competitive climate policy. Second, we believe that government should pause the application of the EVAS for the 2027 and 2028 model years as well, for which our members are currently finalizing product planning without knowing what the regulations will be moving forward. This additional pause could be undertaken while still incentivizing automakers with early action credits as they continue to bring zero-emission vehicles to market. Third, the membership of the Global Automakers of Canada is diverse, with smaller and larger manufacturers, some that have full product lineups, while others have limited product lineups. If EVAS is to remain, it must be flexible, and maximum flexibility is required. In our view, such flexibility would contemplate for providing automakers with the option of either complying with GHG emissions regulations or a revised achievable ZEV mandate. Under such scenario, if a company met the provisions of one regulation, they would be deemed to have met the provisions of the other. This approach would assist industry by allowing each company to adopt the regulatory framework that would work best for that company's needs, while ensuring that the goal of emissions reduction is achieved. This flexibility is key, especially with the current supply chain disruptions and the unprecedented tariff situation that have put a strain on companies' financial liquidity. Importantly, such flexibility would avoid product constraint for consumers and retain maximum choice. Fourth, British Columbia and Quebec's respective ZEV mandates are a significant internal trade barrier for automakers in Canada. They distort the internal market. And themselves present compliance liabilities for automakers. The Government of Canada must work with both jurisdictions to ensure that alignment with the federal government's policy approach. At the very least, it should secure agreement from both provinces for a deemed-to-comply clause within their regulations, which recognizes EVAS compliance as an effective compliance with their own provincial mandate. Finally, the collapse of consumer demand for ZEVs demonstrates that the government cannot reasonably set targets for ZEV adoption without complementary and established demand-side policies such as addressing price parity for consumers and supporting access to reliable and affordable charging infrastructure. At the end of the day, if we're not crystal clear on the goal of the regulation, it's very difficult to know if we have achieved it. The current situation is that we have more ZEV models available than ever before, but what the industry doesn't have is customers, or at least not enough of them to meet the regulatory targets for next year. And what customers don't have is the incentives that were put in place to encourage them to purchase
Thank you, Mr. Adams. Thank you. La parole est à vous, Monsieur Côté, pour 5 minutes. Merci.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Bonjour à toutes et tous, Mesdames et Messieurs les membres du Comité. Je suis Marie-Josée Côté, directrice des affaires gouvernementales et des politiques publiques chez Propulsion Québec. Je suis accompagnée aujourd'hui de mon collègue Stéphane Pascalon, chargé de projet principal. Propulsion Québec est la grappe...
Propulsion Québec, hello. Is there an issue with the interpretation? Can you hear me? Do you hear the interpretation? Perfect. We'll restart. Ms. Cote. From the beginning. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Propulsion Québec is the zero-emission transportation industry commission, a cluster. Its mission is to accelerate the growth of this sector and strengthen its international competitiveness. We bring together more than 200 Quebec companies active in 3 strategic sectors of the economy: zero-emission vehicles, charging infrastructure, and the battery industry from mining to recycling. Zero-emission transportation is an economic driver for Quebec, which can rely on its renewable energy, critical and strategic minerals, and world-class expertise to build a competitive industry. These assets put us at the forefront of contributing to Canada's success in this industrial revolution. We appreciate the opportunity to participate in this review of the federal standard on EVs. This is an opportunity to take stock of the evolution of the zero-emission transportation sector and adjust our approach to move forward more effectively. However, it remains essential to stay the course and continue the efforts underway. We support EVAS. It is a lever that promotes not only the deployment of a charging network in all regions, but also the growth of a complete industrial ecosystem around batteries, critical minerals, charging stations, and energy management software. Should be noted that Quebec's industry includes suppliers of strategic parts, companies specializing in the development and production of charging infrastructure, and companies involved in the production, recycling, and assembly of batteries. They need predictable environments that support the electrification of transportation. Clear standards strengthen investor confidence, foster innovation, and demonstrate strong political will. Thanks to the early adoption of its ZEV standard in 2018 and a set of winning conditions, Quebec is now a Canadian leader in electric transportation. We understand that car manufacturers are facing headwinds, such as trade tensions, such as tariffs on steel, aluminum, and cars, and a slowdown in the growth of EVs in Canada. In this context, an adjustment to the standard and its pace must be considered to take into account economic and industrial constraints while maintaining the goal of reducing GHGs and transitioning to sustainable mobility. Canada must combine pragmatism and ambition to remain competitive, particularly in the face of Europe and Canada, which are moving at full speed ahead. The transformation of the Canadian car industry is essential to ensure its longevity and sustainability. We would also like to take this opportunity to reiterate that the EVAS must be part of a comprehensive industrial strategy for the zero-emission transportation sector. It will be essential to create winning conditions. International and Quebec experience shows that an integrated approach combining regulation, financial incentives, and accessible infrastructure remains the key to success. We recommend the reintroduction of the incentive program for zero-emission vehicles to stimulate blend, support for rapid and uniform development of a national charging network across the country, and support for local production, assembly, and manufacturing of key components. The government must also play an exemplary role by promoting zero-emission vehicles in its own public vehicle fleets, therefore creating a showcase effect for all buyers. In closing, we must seize the opportunities to position Quebec and Canada as North American leaders in sustainable transportation. The time has come to shape the economy of tomorrow, to take concrete measures to meet climate targets and provide future generations with sustainable, high-quality jobs. We encourage the government to implement a coherent industrial strategy that includes a standard with ambitious and realistic targets and robust incentives. Thank you for your attention. We would be happy to continue the discussion with you. Thank you, Ms. Cote. Okay. The Conservatives, we will start with you. Mr. Leslie, you have 6 minutes.
I'd like to start with you, Mr. Adams. You mentioned towards the end of your opening remarks that there are many different models available for many of your members here in Canada, but simply not enough customers. So how will manufacturers and, more importantly, directly car dealers meet their targets if they simply do not have enough customers wanting to buy EVs?
Car dealers don't have targets, the manufacturers do, but the dealers end up being at the end of the tunnel, if you will, with respect to having the EVs on their lots. So if they have EVs on their lots and they're not able to sell those EVs, the normal practice is to discount that product. But all that results in one thing before even the discounting is that vehicle is going to stay in the lot longer, which means increased financing costs for the dealer. And then if they're selling it having to incentivize that vehicle. So a vehicle that's probably being built and sold to the dealer at a loss is incurring another loss as well.
And this is after a significant upfront costs of specialized equipment, forklifts, a lot of the extra costs, particularly in smaller dealership networks where, liquidity is a problem, just as it is for yourself and the folks you represent as the manufacturers. So we've heard a lot about the compliance credit system, this costly system that'll work out to about $20,000. I know there's some flexibility of how the manufacturer can spend that money. But my question is, what are the costs involved from your perspective for the manufacturers, and who ultimately is going to bear them?
Well, the costs associated for the manufacturers are going to be the costs in terms of purchasing credits to be able to comply with the regulation. And as in most things, costs are normally passed along to the consumer at the end of the day. So I'm sure the committee has been provided with the recent CD Howe report. I think it was estimated there are something like 200 million, I think, if I'm not mistaken, and costs just associated with the transition for next year.
These are for-profit companies. It's not expected that they bear the cost, but I think it's really an overlooked factor in the entirety of the cost. It seems like this is supposed to be such a cheap enterprise, this development of an EV system. But when we look at the compliance system, companies like Tesla, American-owned, Elon Musk-owned company, is one of the few that is simply creating credits because they are not a hybridized gas, ICE-powered vehicle manufacturer as well as EVs. So under the proposed, although pause system and moving forward, will Canadian automakers be paying companies like Tesla millions of dollars to buy these compliance credits instead of if they're not able to sell enough EVs?
Short answer, yes.
Okay. My understanding is Tesla had on its balance sheet in the first quarter of last year something like $400 million. Do you know, have there already been money transferred from some Canadian companies towards Tesla?
I don't have a line of sight into that, I'm sorry.
Okay. So if automakers simply can buy these credits from Tesla instead of selling the EVs, in your view, is this really about reducing emissions, or is it a way to transfer money from Canadian companies to foreign-owned ones?
Well, I think what it is doing is that set up a structure where that compliance challenges are, there are a number of ways that companies can comply, but that could be one result, yes, in terms of transferring money in that regard.
And how transparent would the trading of this credit system be? And would Canadians be able to see who would be profiting and who would be paying from the system?
My understanding is that there's no visibility on that at the moment.
So we've talked about this being an attempt to drive market signals. It seems obvious to me that many of the folks or the companies that you represent see the value from a market dynamic that already exists, that people in certain areas of this country for certain reasons want to buy an EV, these innovative machines, and it makes sense for them and their families. So would you expect your member companies to, whether or not the mandate stays in place or is enhanced or is eliminated, are EVs here to stay? Are you expecting that the manufacturers that are working in Canada will continue to make them, as well as the retailers, the dealers that have them in Canada are going to continue to sell them because they want to make money and they think that there's a market demand for it?
Yeah, I mean, the long-term trend around the world, including North America, is towards electrification. I would say that electrification probably includes hybrid as well, but that is a long-term trend of where the world is going. There's been probably $1.5 trillion invested worldwide towards this electrification transition.
Why is it that you think, in the context of the Canadian regulations and this mandate, it doesn't include hybrids? I know some of the companies that you represent have focused more on hybrids, and frankly, I come from a rural area. Hybrids make a heck of a lot more sense. Why is it that the mandate is not aiming to include hybrids?
Well, I think some of your environmental witnesses would say that the mandate shouldn't even include plug-in hybrids, because the inference there is that a plug-in hybrid still emits greenhouse gas emissions by virtue of the fact that it runs on a gasoline engine. So that would be the reason why I would suggest that hybrids have not been included in the mandate. But are we looking at emissions reduction overall, or are we looking at emissions reduction from a specific technology?
Right. So it would still, so if it were to be included, it would still reduce emissions, correct? I mean, I think that's where we get lost in this conversation, is it's the be-all, end-all. We must completely electrify our entire fleet of our nation's vehicles by a certain date, or I would take a more practical approach of let's make incremental changes as technology develops and we can develop the proper supply chains as Canada. Is it the view of your organization and many of your members that we need to have a practical approach that takes into the considerations of consumers now and into the future and expand hybridization into this conversation?
Thank you very much. Sorry about that. Time is up. Mrs. Miedema, 6 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you, witnesses, for appearing today. I really appreciate it. Mr. Adams, how many members are in Global Automakers of Canada? What's your membership?
16 member companies representing approximately 25 different brands.
Okay. And did every single member agree to the recommendations you're proposing to the EVAS?
Yes.
They voted?
That's...
and it was unanimous?
Yes.
Okay. And we've been hearing a lot of testimony about the need for market certainty and how that really drives investment, it drives risk-taking, it drives scaling up. How can you have that certainty if your proposal is to pause for the next few years so that there wouldn't be any clarity in the direction this country was going when it came to EVAS?
Well, I think what we need when we talk about certainty, we need certainty in the environment that we're going to be operating in. So right now we've got discussion, as I'm sure the committee is well aware, in the States where that all the environmental regulation is essentially being pulled down by the Trump administration. We're waiting for certainty out of the U.S. in terms of the CAFE regulations under NHTSA, which should come either later this year or early next year. But I think the reality is that our company's product planning horizons are generally about 3 years. So if we don't know what the regulation is, we won't know what the outcome of the EVAS review is going to be until sometime later this year, at which point we'll be halfway through the 2026 model year.
Yeah, I think Canada's focus is on what it can control, and we don't know how long this uncertainty from the United States is going to continue. Just one point to make before I move on to the other witnesses about hybrids. The plug-in hybrid electric vehicles are included in the EVAS, and that essentially is the compromise for areas that need it as we continue to roll out complete charging infrastructure across this country. Monsieur Cote, can you talk about why EVAS is important when we have things like the sunsetting of the Rouler Vert program and other subsidies in how we can continue moving forward with the transition?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I get it, the start of your question. Can you repeat, please?
So things like Rouler Vert, le programme, ça arrête? Oui.
Is the program like Rouler Vert is sunsetting, right?
So what does that do to the importance of having the electric vehicle availability standard?
C'est parce que ça va...
Because it will make sure that dealerships and manufacturers know that what's produced in Canada will be more accessible. There will be price corrections. We see that following the reduction of subsidies that happened this year, dealerships and producers adjusted prices. We know that is possible. So then, we'll have to see how industry and market will adapt to that. Probably slower than how industry adapts.
For consumers, you do a lot of education, awareness. Do you do surveys of your membership?
Oui, on a...
Yes, we had surveys. 2 since I started with this organization in 2018. So there are surveys. We also work with partners to create larger surveys. So yes, our members are surveyed.
Moni talked about the collapse for consumer demand for electric vehicles, which runs counter to what we've heard from a lot of testimony through this study. I'm wondering what your consumers would say about the demand for electric vehicles in Quebec.
La demande...
There is demand, and it's certain that in Quebec, people are transitioning with the uncertainty of subsidies. Despite that, people do not react as much as the past. They will still consider EVs when they need a new car. And pretty much all of them, if not all, will go back to buying EVs when they need a new car.
To say about this statement of the collapse for consumer demand for electric vehicles from your perspective?
In fact, what we see in Quebec is that there is still demand. We just saw demand slowing because of the political environment. Support for EVs is too variable. So for the first quarter of 2025, we saw a significant drop because of the end of federal and provincial programs that were suspended for 2 months, and then people waited before buying their cars. So there needs to be a stable environment. There also needs to be charging infrastructure. And charging stations are built depending on the sales of EVs. So we are talking about an entire ecosystem around EVs that need to be predictable. Thank you very much. Mr. Bonnet, you have 6 minutes. Mr. Adams, some of your members support EVAS. For example, Volkswagen, Kia, amongst others. Others like Honda and Toyota are doing everything to end them. You represent all of them. Where are you in this space?
Sorry, didn't hear the last part.
You represent Honda and Toyota, Kia, Volkswagen. Kia and Volkswagen support it. Honda and Toyota do everything to end this EVAS. You, as the association that represents everyone, do you support or are you not in support of EVAS?
EVAS, as outlined, if it's going to remain, needs to have the recommended changes that I outlined in my remarks.
OK. Donc, vous êtes pour une norme, mais vous voulez la diluer, alors que ça, c'est pas la position de votre...
Dilute it. You want to dilute it. That's not the position of Volkswagen or Kia.
Of the Industry Association.
OK. Est-ce que c'est la position de Volkswagen et Kia?
So what about...
Vous représentez ces gens-là, non?
Yes.
You represent them, right? And you cannot tell me what their position is.
Is what I've outlined here as our group. That's what we've consented upon.
OK. Volkswagen, Kia a la même position que...
So Volkswagen and Kia has the same position as Toyota and Honda?
As I've outlined in my remarks, yes.
OK. Est-ce que vous reconnaissez qu'ils n'ont pas les mêmes positions?
Do you acknowledge that they don't have the same positions? That Toyota and Honda want to end EVAS while the others want to modify it?
That is actually the position of Honda or Toyota. But I think the view
Vous savez
of...
pas. Excusez, vous dites vous savez pas.
You're saying that you don't know.
I'm not saying that I don't know. I'm saying I don't know that that's the position of Honda and Toyota, that they want to end EVAS.
C'est ça, donc vous savez pas si c'est leur position.
You're essentially saying you don't know that's their position. You cannot tell me if they want to keep it or remove it.
Honda and Toyota, my members are comfortable with the position that I put before you today.
OK, c'est pas ça ma question. Est-ce que vous êtes capable de me dire s'ils veulent la garder ou l'éliminer de la norme?
Can you tell me if they want to keep it or remove it? Toyota, Honda?
Remarks that I've made today.
OK, mais donc vous répondez pas à la question.
You're not answering my question then. Okay, thank you. You're saying that you're against importing European EVs that are affordable. You say that that will harm jobs in Honda. Honda is not manufacturing EVs. They have hybrids, but they're not making EVs in Canada. Are you saying that we have to force Canadians to buy gas cars to not harm automobile producers that refuse to build EVs, like Honda?
That's not what I'm saying, no.
OK, mais si...
Okay, so if you're saying that this will be harmful to jobs in Honda, then is that what you're saying?
I don't think I made any specific remarks with respect to Honda.
Vous avez jamais dit ça dans votre vie?
You never said that in your life?
In my remarks today...
OK, je parle pas aujourd'hui, là, mais en général, quand on dit...
I'm not talking about today, I'm talking about things in general. Have you ever said something like this in the public spaces?
Ça nuire aux emplois Honda?
That it will jeopardize jobs at Honda.
The question was, what would jeopardize jobs at Honda?
Vous avez dit...
You said, have you already said that EVAS will harm jobs at Honda in Canada?
I don't believe I've said that.
OK, ben on fera la vérification.
Okay, well, we will check the records. Thank you. So there are regulations on GHG emissions for light vehicles that will be canceled because it needs to be aligned with American legislation. What do you think needs to be changed to regulate the reduction of GHGs produced by light-duty vehicles?
Well, I don't think there's been a determination that the Canadian regulations are going to be changed at this point.
Mais la réglementation canadienne doit être alignée sur les États-Unis qui ont abandonné.
But American regulations need to be aligned with American regs that will be repealed. What do you think are the measures that need to be taken in order to reduce emissions for light vehicles?
Well, I think the view that makes sense, that all of our members support, is to have a technology-neutral approach to reducing emissions. So that would be having greenhouse gas emissions targets that every company can work towards deploying their own specific technology to meet specific targets. And that, in that regard, that tends to drive the same outcome as what an EVAS does, which drives more electrification into the marketplace.
Okay. Monsieur Pascalon.
Mr. Pascalon and Ms. Cote, what do EV target sales should be based on? Propulsion Québec's suggestions is based on what we've seen in other countries. We based ourselves on the Norwegian model with a 12-year 12-year process because we are 12 years behind. When you look at the situation in China, they are following the same rate as Norway, but they are 7 years behind. So we are about 5 years behind China. And our adoption curve is based on what is happening in other countries when it comes to adopting EVs. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bonnet. Mr. Bexy, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, witnesses, for being here today. Appreciate it. Mr. Adams, you mentioned a CD Howe report. Do you have access to that report, or could you provide the link to the committee, or provide the materials to the committee? Thank you. You've warned that the transition to EVs can only happen as quickly as consumers are willing to move. You know, it's kind of the old adage of pushing a rope versus pulling a rope. Higher upfront costs and lack of charging infrastructure, all the range anxiety. We talk about all kinds of things, whether those are excuses or not, or reality. That doesn't matter as much as the practicality of today. We've also heard from dealers that 50% of sales of their inventory are vocational. It means they're work vehicles. They're vehicles that are used to produce or contribute to GDP. Can you comment on how the GDP impact if the right tools for the job aren't available? If this EV standard pushes the inventory balance, dealerships out of inventory balance, and they don't have the vehicles that their customers want, right? What is that going to do to our GDP, which is already, you know, in precipitous decline?
Yeah, I think what I would, or how I would answer that question is the CD Howe talks a little bit about that report, which I will get for the committee, or get the link for the committee. But it suggests that if companies have to comply with EVAS, that one of the fundamental ways that a company could comply is just to reduce the sale of gasoline-powered vehicles. And they cite potential demand or compliance demand reduction of about 400,000 units in the Canadian marketplace.
So what do you think that would do to the price of the remaining units in inventory? I mean, supply and demand dictates that.
Yeah, it is a supply and demand question, obviously, and I think that would mean that the cost of vehicles that are already challenging for a lot of consumers would go up.
It's not just consumers, but tradespeople.
Yes.
I mean, your plumber now is going to have to spend how much more for his tools of the trade to come out and fix your toilet in the middle of winter. You suggested that there's $1.5 trillion already invested in electrification. Globally. With that being the case, and on that trajectory, could you argue that these regulations, or could you comment on an argument that these regulations are just interfering with the natural process that's going to happen anyway if you allow consumer choice to happen, right? We're going in that direction?
Yeah, I mean, that is definitely where the industry is going.
But it could go that way without taxpayer subsidy and just digging deeper into taxpayers' pockets to synthetically manipulate a market.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think everybody or anybody thought that this was going to be a straight curve up. The road to transition is always going to be a bumpy one with ups and downs. But yeah, I think the challenge is that consumers have been used to incentives, and without incentives, then they're not purchasing vehicles in the same quantity that they used to. I'm not denying that EV sales have gone up, but they just haven't gone up to the same degree that's required under the EVAS.
Do you think it's saturated right now, that the EV demand is saturated without government subsidies?
I couldn't necessarily speak to that, but I guess what I can say is I think the higher you go up the adoption curve, then the more difficult it is to switch people into a different vehicle. Early adopters are prepared to pay anything for the latest technology, undergo any inconvenience.
Windows, you take your pick, the iPhone, Okay, I appreciate that. I think somewhere along the line here where, you know, the example of hybrids and plug-in hybrids and the EV standard, and that there's an arbitrary requirement that they must have a rather large plugged-in range before the ICE engine kicks in to carry on. I think that significantly impacts the choice of vehicles that are available to the consumers, especially tradespeople that might want to consider a hybrid. Could you comment on that at all?
not sure I entirely understand the question, but I think the best solution for consumers and tradespeople is to have the broadest availability of vehicles to suit their needs.
The perfect is the enemy of the good, I think, in this case, that in a lot of ways that it's not to say we shouldn't be ambitious and shoot for the moon in our ambitions, but realistic in our expectations on how we come up with it. Any other closing comments?
I just think that some of the comments that have been made, we're not against electric vehicles. Our members make electric vehicles. We support electric vehicle adoption.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr.
See my time. Anybody else want the 2 seconds?
You're done. 2 seconds. Mr. Vanjoy, the floor is yours for 5 minutes. But thank you for offering, Mr. Bixby.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, witnesses. Mr. Cote, in your original testimony this afternoon, you cited a difference in the cost between operating an electric vehicle per 100 kilometers versus a comparable gas-powered vehicle. Can you reshare that number? I didn't quite catch the number.
$2 to $3 for charging at home for 100 kilometers, and $10 to $15 for a gas car, and that's for every 100 kilometers.
$2 to $3 for an electric vehicle versus 10 to 15 for a gas-powered vehicle.
Yes, for the same distance.
Okay, we heard this morning. We heard that 99% of electric vehicle users will buy another electric vehicle in the future. I think you also mentioned that that figure may be close to 100%. So I have those figures correct?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Adams, I'd like to ask you, economic history is littered with companies that failed to adapt to shifting market demands. What do you foresee as the impact for the automakers that you represent, and which contribute greatly to our economy at present? What do you foresee as the impact of moving too slowly as market demand shifts towards electric vehicles?
I think what I would say is that I think some of the Japanese manufacturers were actually criticized for being too slow to adopt electrification. And I think when you look at sort of what's happened over the course of time here, they've actually maybe look a little bit smarter now in terms of how they adopt a full range of technological suites that they offer to the consumer, whether it's hybrid, plug-in hybrid, or EV. Yes, my two manufacturers are actually producing plug-in hybrids in Canada right now. What I do know is that manufacturers will always produce what consumers want to buy.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but we do have, I believe, a full suite of gas-powered vehicles available for Canadians. The electric availability standard is more about broadening that spectrum, which you've already said is good for consumer choice. So why wouldn't that be something that we would embrace in order to provide more choice?
In terms of having the manufacturers, the two manufacturers I represent build electric vehicles in Canada?
Yes, align more closely with where you've already testified the market is headed indisputably.
Yeah, well, and I think that was certainly Honda's plan, as I think the committee is well aware, and I think they had to pull back that plan based on consumer demand and the realities that we were facing. If you look at it, doesn't matter which manufacturer in Canada, the two I represent or the other three, 85% of their production goes into the U.S. market. So what we built here is somewhat predicated on what consumers in the United States want.
Yeah. And is that consumer demand? Because we've already heard that the savings in operating an electric vehicle are vastly superior than than a gas-powered vehicle. Is that consumer hesitancy a result of misinformation and disinformation about the practicality of electric vehicles in Canada?
I don't think so. I think what I will say as an electric vehicle driver myself, there are a few things that still bother consumers. The price of the vehicles, the charging infrastructure, which I'm acutely aware of because my home is in Owen Sound, Ontario, and I'm down in the city quite a bit. And a fast charger cannot be a fast charger at times when you actually think it is. So there are all these challenges, and I think the other thing is convenience for consumers. They want, and that will get there, but they want to be able to charge their EV in the same amount of time it takes them to fill their gas tank.
Mm-hmm. You're not disputing that the EV has a lower total cost of ownership than a gas-powered vehicle?
No, absolutely not. The problem is the upfront cost is it's getting people a trade-off, right? Am I going to pay $200 or $300 more a month for an EV that costs more to save money over time? I think in the affordability challenges that a lot of Canadians are in today, the answer is probably no.
So then would you agree that smart public policy is beneficial to Canadians and consumers if it helps them to make that
Sorry, Mr.
transition?
Fanjoy. Sorry about that. Time is up.
All right, thank you.
Monsieur Bonnet, la parole est à vous pour...
Mr. Bonnet, you have 5 minutes. Mr. Pascalon and Ms. Cote, can you talk about the deployment of charging stations? Is it equitably spread across provinces, or are there provinces such as Quebec ahead of others? Yes, thank you for the question. Quebec is ahead when it comes to the number of charging stations. We have around 1/3 of the charging infrastructure of this country. The Quebec government implemented programs such as an accelerated construction of this infrastructure. More works need to be done, but the same strategy needs to be adopted in Canada. Mr. Chair, I see that their time is running out. A few meetings ago, I tabled a motion on the appearance of the Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development. I send the motion to all members here, and can we quickly look at it, please? We just distributed the motion, and the clerk, I will ask the clerk to reread it, so it will be in the written record. Okay, I will read it quickly. That all organizations that were the subject of a performance audit conducted by the Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development, including the June 2025 audit, provide a detailed action plan to follow up on the audit's recommendations with specific measures, implementation timelines, and the names of those responsible to both the committee and the Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development within 6 months of the tabling of the audit in the House of Commons. That organizations invited to appear provide before the committee to discuss the findings of an audit, including the June 2025 audit, providing an action plan to committee members no later than 48 hours before the start of the hearing, that the action plans and progress reports submitted to the committee be published on the committee's website, that the Commissioner of Environment and Sustainable Development be invited to appear before the committee to discuss his reports, including those of June 2025. Thank you. Debate?
I think this is a good motion, but it's very broad. So I would like to propose an amendment to this motion, if I may, that we delete the line that all organizations that have been subject to a performance audit by the Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development, end quote, and replace it with Environment and Climate Change Canada, so that we have a more focused motion, because otherwise it could relate to any part of the full government, and I don't think that that's the objective.
Debate on the suggested amendment. Vote. No further debate. Donc, suggested amendment. All those in favor? All those in favor of the suggested amendment?
That's 4. Opposed?
Opposed?
That's 5. Defeated.
The suggested amendment has been defeated.
Debate on the main motion.
Back to the debate on the main motion. Mrs. Medema.
Sorry, I just had one other question of clarity. I think that after the words audit recommendations, that we should add the line from the Commissioner of Environment and Sustainable Development, so that it's the audit recommendations from that commissioner, because otherwise it could just mean any audit recommendations, and I think that that's appropriate for this motion.
Debate on the amendment, on the suggested amendment.
Monsieur le Président, pouvez-vous juste...
Sorry, Mr. Chair. Can you just tell us where that amendment will be?
After the words audit recommendations, to say it's not just audit recommendations, any audit recommendations, it's audit recommendations from the Commissioner of Environment and Sustainable Development.
Mr. Leslie.
I see the intention. To me, it seems very clear, given that it says Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development in the same sentence. I think it's pretty clear that our committee would not feel the prerogative to just willy-nilly pick a different department outside of environment, outside of this commissioner's report. So I don't think that's a necessary addition.
Mrs. Medema.
But is it an issue, or can we just do it for clarity's sake, because words do matter?
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. Chair, we have been working on this motion for many days. It's the commissioner themselves who suggest that wording. It was the case in past parliaments, and I believe we should keep this version.
Maple fin des discours.
But it's not the commissioner that decides, it's the committee. That's why we put forward these amendments.
8. All those in favor? All those opposed?
4, 5. Defeated.
Suggested amendment defeated. Mr. Fanjoy.
Mr. Chair, it's not the responsibility of this committee to directly name government officials and assign them work. I therefore move to remove the lines that states "and responsible individuals" and instead place the word "and" after including specific actions.
Debate on the suggested amendment. Mr. Leslie.
Just could you repeat where that is going?
So remove the line that states "and responsible individuals" and instead place the word "and" after including specific actions.
No, I like accountability.
For the debate. All those in favor of the suggested amendment? All those against? Amendment defeated. Any further amendments? Mr. Fanjoy.
I move to amend the motion by striking in the second paragraph the words "organization that" and replacing it with "Environment and Climate Change Canada."
Debate on the amendment. All those in favor? 4. All those against?
5. Defeated.
Amended, defeated. Any further amendments? Mr. Leslie?
I would just, given that we have since had a report come out from the Environment Commissioner, and the last paragraph that currently reads, "Before the Commissioner to discuss his reports, including those of June 2025, I would amend to add "and November 2025.
Debate.
Juste une question.
I have a question, Mr. Chair. You want to add that remark to everywhere that says June 2025 or just at the end of it?
Mr. Leslie?
I believe just at the end, given that the responding departments or agencies would not be able to fulfill the obligation as outlined earlier, so it would just be regarding the appearance to include the November 2025 portion.
Mr. Bennett finished his time, by the way.
Donc, pour être certain de comprendre, vous voulez...
So if I understand correctly, you do not want to see the report tabled in November on action plans be the one, be part of it? If that's the case, then we will need to add your fairly interesting suggestion.
I think it's just so to my colleague, my concern is that if I think we should have the Environment Commissioner appear relatively soon. So in fairness to what is a reasonable ask for a government that has caused much pain and very little gain as a result, as shown by this commissioner, I think we could start that for following appearances, but include the date specific to the upcoming appearance so that we may ask questions regarding both the June and November reports to the Environment Commissioner.
Debate on the proposed amendment. Mrs. Mediva?
Sir, I would ask just for some clarification on what that last piece is that you just
Gain or no gain?
proposed and why it's part of this motion, please. Thank you.
Sure. So I'm amending the last paragraph that is the invitation for the Commissioner to appear before the committee to discuss his reports, including those of June 2025. So that was the one that the Commissioner has not yet appeared for and has, perhaps since this was originally drafted, I think this was tabled previous to his reports, his November 6th report coming out, so that we are within the scope of questioning for his appearance, that it be based on the June 2025 reports and the November 2025 reports, not just the June reports. So we're bundling probably for, I don't know if it's probably 2 hours for both of those reports, and then not touching the remaining words that give continuity for more or less an automatic invitation for the Commissioner regarding each time he releases his semi-annual reports.
I'd like to suspend for 2 minutes.
Suspend. So, any more debate, further debate? All those in favor to the suggested amendment presented by Mr. Leslie?
5.
All those against?
4. Adopted.
Adopted. Mr. Leslie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. After further consideration, I think my colleague may have been correct in suggesting that the November 2025 should be added throughout. So I would like to move that wherever following, including the June 2025 audit, comma, and November 2025 be added. So it looks to be on 2 occasions prior within the motion.
So this is another amendment you are proposing?
Correct.
Debate to the proposed amendment. All those in favor? All those against? Motion adopted. Any further amendments?
Debate on the main motion.
So we'll go back to the motion. Debate on the main motion.
All those in favor?
All those in favor of the main motion?
That's 5.
All those against the motion?
4. Adopted.
Motion has been adopted.
All right, back to questioning witnesses.
So we're back to questioning the witnesses. Monsieur Bonnet, il vous restait quelques secondes.
Mr. Bonnet, you had a few seconds left, so go ahead. Maybe about EV usage. You said that 90% of people want to keep buying EVs. Is that the case when people try out EVs, they want to keep using them? Microphone, s'il vous plaît. Microphone, please. Inaudible. When it comes to long-term costs, we see that it's beneficial for consumers. So buying the first one is hard, but then it benefits the consumer. So people want to stay with EVs because it will allow them to spend more money elsewhere. Do you have solutions for affordability? You talked about affordability. Can you maybe send us a brief? The zero emission standard will reduce prices.
The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to Mr. Adams, thank you for your testimony here today. And it seems we're getting on the affordability topic for the majority of our discussions and our questions and answers, and yet we are the Environment Committee. But in that same vein, can I ask about the end of life when it comes to batteries for EVs? There doesn't seem to be one national strategy to address how these batteries are stored or recycled. Can you tell me the cost of recycling these batteries or storing them at the end of life? Is that absorbed by manufacturers, or is that subsidized by government, or is that passed on to consumers?
It's actually a situation where the industry itself is taking care of that because there are not enough raw materials for the batteries. So much of the material that are in batteries, the manufacturers want that back to integrate it back into new batteries. So before they even get to the stage where they're recycling, after a battery declines below about 80% of its efficiency in the vehicle, it's really no longer useful to the same degree as it would be. So those then become storage for battery storage, for electricity storage rather, and then they go on to be recycled after that. So currently there is not an issue with the recycling of batteries. The manufacturers want those batteries back. And the manufacturers have actually worked to develop a program that if there is an orphan battery somewhere in a junkyard or somewhere else, that they will take care of that battery as well.
Okay, thank you. And the cost to do, there is a cost to that. Where is that cost absorbed? Is it by the manufacturers?
Yes.
And so it's not worked into the purchase price at all?
Well, the recycled materials actually help defray the cost of developing the new batteries by bringing those batteries back into the the whole supply chain.
Okay, so there's no recycling cost passed on to the consumer, say like a tire, a rubber tire, or say a pop can. There's nothing transferred to the consumer.
Not currently, and there are some provinces that are looking to try and do that, trying to equate an electric vehicle battery that's thousands of pounds to a AA battery, but there's no comparison whatsoever. You're not going to find EV batteries in any sort of waste stream, if you will.
Okay, and we've been compared to our failings of an EV mandate in terms of Norway. But Norway has 5 million people as compared to Canada's 40 million people, plus the geography is way different. 300,000 square kilometers of Norway compared to almost 10 million square miles of Canada, not including the marine areas. But Norway has been praised for its recycling ability, and that's something that Canada should duplicate. But Norway's got a stockpile of batteries. It can't keep up. And so the market is trying to address this, but in the meantime, it's been characterized as a ticking time bomb, given the components that go into a battery, mainly lithium, which can cause a fire that you can't put out. And we've already seen this in battery plants in California, Korea, where the storage of batteries basically causes a fire risk, and mainly what you do is just let them burn out. And in that same fire, you're actually releasing noxious gases. If we do go full scale with the mandate that BC's already dropped, and depending on Canada, do we need a national strategy, not only in terms of the environmental issues surrounding storage or recycling batteries, but also for the safety of our communities? Do we need a national strategy to recycle batteries and store batteries in Canada?
I think to a certain extent we have that with the program that we put in place to make sure that the situation that you're talking about doesn't occur. With respect to Norway, one of the things I would say is that Norway had a value-added tax. When they removed that tax, EVs became cheaper than gasoline-powered vehicles, which has been largely responsible for the adoption of electric vehicles in Norway.
But I'm talking about the storage of batteries that they can't keep up with. They've been praised for the government establishing a recycling plant, but the storage of batteries is going to become an issue for them, especially if that catches fire. And we have thermal runaway, like what we've seen in Korea and California, for basically a battery fire that you can't put out. Does Canada need a strategy on recycling batteries for environmental issues as well as safety issues?
I think it's part of what could be contemplated in the EVAS review that we're talking about now.
And I cede my remaining 2 seconds.
Very much. Thank you very much. Mr. Greaves, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all, the witnesses, for being here today. Mr. Adams, I'd like to ask you a little bit more about your members and some of the positions that they've had in different jurisdictions on the question of EV adoption. Do your members have the same views on an EV standard, for example, in Canada, as they do in other markets, such as the European Union?
I'm aware of the standards that they have in Canada. I don't honestly, without more research, have a line of sight into their standards or their position in Europe.
So my understanding is that some of those automakers do have different standards, or different targets, I should say, that they're pursuing in different jurisdictions. And that makes a lot of sense because they're responding to the political and economic signals that they're getting from governments in those different jurisdictions. We've heard a great deal today about supply and demand. We understand the way that market signals work. We understand the way that incentives work. In the context of the concern you've raised about soft demand for electric vehicles amongst Canadian consumers, is it your view that governments maintaining support in the form of subsidies or other tools for consumers would help to maintain and bolster that demand in a way that would then make it more cost effective for your members?
I think it would help, but it's not a solution to the whole problem of waning demand. Okay. But it would help.
So it would contribute, though, positively to maintaining that demand in a way that would make production of those vehicles more cost effective for your members.
I don't know about the cost of production, but it would certainly make the cost for consumers more affordable.
Okay. So is part of the difficulty then that we're having in the Canadian market with respect to EV adoption actually about the inconsistency in our regulatory environment, and indeed the very overt efforts by some political parties, some politicians, and some subnational governments to actually push back against this direction, to actually impede and slow down the transition towards clean energy and electric vehicles, which they profess to support?
I would say that federal government has always had greenhouse gas emission standards. The provinces have, with the environment being a shared jurisdiction, the federal government has allowed the provinces to make their own determination around zero-emission vehicle mandates, for instance. So I think provincial governments have looked at what makes sense for their particular circumstances. From a manufacturer's perspective, as I said in my remarks, they would favor, if we're going to have a ZEV mandate, that it would be one national mandate.
All right, thank you. And then final question would be for Monsieur Côté. Bonjour, Monsieur Côté. Du point de vue des
Mr. Côté, from the consumers and market perspective, what would be the impacts of a laxing of the EV mandate for buyers across Canada? You said if there's a slowdown? I think that people who are informed can still do the adoption, but they are still impacted by all the support and the standards. So it needs to continue to keep the momentum as long as we have not seen a higher percentage. Thank you.
So I would like to thank the witnesses for their testimony today, and the witnesses are now excused. Thank you. Meeting is adjourned.